All right, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the early Earth, what it was like, a little bit about geologic time, and also about fossils and fossilization, that whole process. So hopefully, I've got a couple of videos embedded in here. I don't know if they'll work or not, but I'll provide you with links to those from our Angel page. But starting here with the early Earth, in order to understand that evolution, has had enough time to happen, we need to understand and appreciate the fact that the Earth is really, really old. That's one of the major assumptions of evolution. And according to, things like astrophysics and, our study of astronomy and carbon or radioactive dating and things like that, we have figured out that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. That is really, really old. Now, there hasn't been life for that entire time, but the Earth, the mass that makes up the Earth has been around for 4.6 billion years in this, relatively solid sphere, and it's been undergoing changes. If you want to know more about that, how we know how old it is, and what happened on the early Earth, I would really recommend that you take astronomy taught by either myself or Mr. Higgins. Um, so if we look at what Earth was like at the very beginning, we call this the Hadean eon. When we talk about geologic time, there's certain divisions. Eons are really, really long. And so a big, huge stretch of time was what we call the Hadean eon. Um, Now, the Hadean eon lasted from about 4.6 billion years ago to about 4 billion years ago. So 600 million years of the Earth being very hot, lots of volcanoes, and meteor collisions. This is, an artist's rendering of what it looked like. This is another one of what it might have looked like from space. Not a very fun place to be. Earth was very, very hot, and its atmosphere was mostly carbon dioxide, water vapor, and nitrogen. Now, we know that from a lot of different studies that scientists have done, looking at rocks, we can figure out what the atmosphere composition must have been based on what's in the rocks. Really, really kind of complex geology. And so if you're interested in that, I'd recommend, unfortunately, we don't offer a geology course, but when you get to college, maybe taking some of this, you can learn a lot more about how we know what the early Earth was like. But for now, you're just going to have to kind of take that at face value. So if you notice, what's one major characteristic that's missing from the early atmosphere? Hopefully you said oxygen. We need oxygen to survive. Wasn't any of that. And actually, it's probably a good thing there wasn't any oxygen because oxygen is very reactive. And so it can form things like free radicals. And actually, the first life forms probably would not have been able to form had there been oxygen because oxygen would have interrupted the processes that make things like amino acids that eventually make proteins. So it's actually a good thing that oxygen wasn't around in the beginning. Otherwise, life might not have come around at all. Um, Oh, by the way, the name Hadean comes from, if you remember from Greek mythology, Hades. Hades was the god of the underworld. Um, so, this obviously has some hellish features to it. It was very, very hot, fire and brimstone kind of a thing going on. Um, about 4.2 billion years ago, we got the first oceans. The Earth cooled enough for water vapor to fall as rain. So there was water vapor up in the sky in the atmosphere, and it cooled down enough that it could actually condense and form rain. Um, those early oceans had the compounds that were necessary for life to form. So, it had lots of, carbon, had things like nitrogen, so we could form amino acids. Had hydrogen and little trace amounts of oxygen, and from the water. So there was everything that we needed, probably some phosphorus in there too. Things that we needed in order to be able to form life was present in the ocean. Um, the early oceans had lots of iron in them. We can tell that by looking at rock layers to know that there wasn't iron in the rock, so it must have been in the oceans and things like that. And we can also look at how it was deposited in the rock layers. Um, and so this is obviously not the early ocean, but this is got lots of iron in it, lots of minerals. It's making it kind of this bright orangish color, and so it is really, really still hot. The oceans would have been really, really warm, but it cooled down just enough for them to form. And then we've got things like lightning. There's lots of weather happening on the early Earth, and that lightning um, provided the energy to make some of our first organic molecules. Now, of course, this is all theory. This is based on the evidence that we've seen, what we've done in labs. This is what we think happened. We've got a lot of evidence to support this, but can we really know for sure? No, none of us were around, and we can't go back in time, unfortunately. If we can figure out how, Doctor Who from the BBC series does it, maybe we could go back and figure that out. Um, but the lightning provided that activation energy we needed to make our first organic molecules. Remember, we learned all about activation energy in the biochemistry unit. Um, the first rocks that formed on the Earth are about this age. Before now, there was so much volcanism going on that rocks would get made, and they get melted, destroyed, pushed under other continents, and the plate tectonics were moving around. Everything was getting destroyed. But about 4.2 billion years ago is when we see our first rocks being formed. So how did life start? Well, we know that the elements necessary for life were in the early oceans. And so you maybe have heard this term called primordial soup. Um, we've been able to recreate this in the lab by knowing, what elements were present in the early ocean. We can put those into a laboratory flask like this, and we can provide energy, which was originally provided by lightning. Here we've got the gases here being bombarded with electricity, and so that would represent the lightning bolts. And then we've been able to actually take these raw ingredients, provide the energy that would have been available to them, and we get amino acids that spontaneously form. Now, you should remember that amino acids are what make up proteins, and then proteins control everything that go on in your cells. So this is really exciting when we were able to show that if we put everything together and basically electrocute it, we can make some amino acids. And so once you've got amino acids, those can start assembling into proteins and then start forming the basis for cellular life. And this has all been recreated in the lab. We've been able to make most of the amino acids that are necessary for proteins. So this provides a lot of really strong evidence that this theory could be true. Again, remembering that theories are well-tested hypotheses. We can't prove them for sure, because we can't go back and actually look at this happening. So what did the first life look like? Well, our first fossilized evidence of life was bacteria. Remember, bacteria are prokaryotes. They have no nucleus. They're very simple life forms. But we can actually see evidence or fossilized evidence of bacteria, in the rock layers. So here you can see these are fossilized. They've been stained so you can see them a little bit easier. But fossilized bacteria, these would be bacillus. They're these nice rod shaped on a surface of some kind of mineral or rock here. Um, Even though these guys are very simple, they changed the face of the planet. Um, these early bacteria made it possible for more advanced life to come around because this little diagram here shows, here's the Earth forms, and this is showing our atmospheric chemistry. This red line represents the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. If you notice, up until about 2.7 billion years ago, there was absolutely no oxygen in the atmosphere. But the first life in the ocean would have been bacteria that eventually could carry out photosynthesis. Well, we know that photosynthesis produces oxygen. So here for several billion years, they were basically just sitting here pumping out oxygen into the ocean. So we had dissolved oxygen in the ocean and into the atmosphere. And so you can see this amount of oxygen going up and up and up and up and up until we get to present day levels. Now, there's no scale here. It'd probably be kind of a logarithmic scale here because it would grow fairly exponentially as we went. Um, but yeah, we can see the oxygen going up as time goes along until we get to finally present day. So these early microbes, they did photosynthesis and pumped the ocean in there. Now, by pumping oxygen in there, that means they were also taking out CO2 because we know that photosynthesis uses CO2 to make sugars, and one of the byproducts is oxygen. So we know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. So if we put that into the oceans, in living organisms, and it's not in the atmosphere, that would allow our atmosphere to cool down. So that would help, the whole process of making the Earth hospitable for organisms to live. So how do we keep track of time? There's a lot of time that has passed. And so we have three major divisions in geologic time. Now you can look at really, really complicated geologic timescale diagrams that break this down even further. Can't remember if I have one in here. No, I don't. Um, but we go from eons, which are the largest. So we have 4 eons here: the Hadean, the Archean, the Proterozoic, and the Phanerozoic, which is what we're in right now. After eons, we have eras. The Precambrian time, so the Hadean, Archean, and Proterozoic, they don't really have eras that I want you to worry about at all. But in the Phanerozoic era or eon, which is where we're at right now, there's 3 main eras. There's Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. Mesozoic is where we think of a lot of our, uh, we've got these periods: Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic. Periods are the smallest division that we're going to look at. And so we've got, this is the time of the dinosaurs here, from about 100 or 65 million years ago to about 200 million years ago. Um, this Precambrian time, maybe you've heard of the Precambrian era. This is, we didn't have a whole lot of life, but during this Cambrian time, we have what's called the Cambrian explosion. And that's where life forms just diversified very quickly. We had a whole bunch of life show up um, during the Cambrian time. And as we move throughout time here, we've got all these different periods and different things were happening during these periods. The transition from one period to the next, a lot of times, was marked by a decline in whatever the dominant species or life forms were. So as the Earth changed, whether from disasters or natural processes, the environment changed, and so the organisms that could live there changed as well. If something happened 65 million years ago to wipe out the dinosaurs, most likely an asteroid impact. And so the transition from Cretaceous to Paleogene in the Cenozoic era um, marked, most of these really, really large reptiles um, dying off, and then a lot of the small mammals were able to survive. And so that's, why we have so many mammals around today. They were what the dominant life form was, and they took over. And right now we're in the Quaternary period. This is the period that's 1.8 million years ago to the present. So you've probably heard of some of these before: Devonian, and Silurian, and Ordovician. Lots of stuff going on in the oceans. That's where we see a lot of the fishes first coming around. Carboniferous, lots of large plants moving onto land, along with the Permian. Triassic through Cretaceous, that was a lot of the dinosaurs. Paleogene through the Quaternary, we had ice ages and woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and things going on through here. And now we're in the Quaternary. This is kind of a more interesting way of looking at it. This is a clock. So if we represented the entire age of the Earth as one day, 100 hours, or midnight would be the formation of the Earth. First living organisms or cells didn't show up until 5:30 a.m. So good chunk of time there with nothing, absolutely no life happening until we get to 5:30 a.m. Then we go from 5:30 till 8 in the morning before photosynthesis even starts. And so, no oxygen being made here. So we're a third of the way through the day, and we don't even have what's necessary for us to live. When we get to about just after noon, so 12:48 p.m., first eukaryotic cells. Before this, all bacteria. We don't even get to multicellular animals, and this is even things like, small little organisms living in water. We don't get to multicellular organisms until 5:36 p.m. So we're getting close to supper time, and we're still, before this point, all single-celled organisms. The first chordates show up at about 9:10 p.m. Chordates are organisms that have some kind of a nerve cord on their back. Plants on land didn't show up until about 9:30 p.m. So, the sun's already gone down and the plants are just coming out. Tetrapods, that's four-legged animals, didn't show up on land until 10:05 p.m. The dinosaurs didn't show up until 10:45 p.m. So, only an hour and 15 minutes left in the day, and the dinosaurs show up. 10:58, the first mammals. These would have been really, really small. Think rodents. No, they weren't the rodents that we know today, but really, really small mammals. Our angiosperms, or flowering plants, didn't show up until 11:20. So 40 minutes left in the day before we had, um, the first flower show up. So that's a long time before we had, our first flower. Wow, that's a really terrible flower, but you get the idea. 11:39. So 21 minutes before the end of the day, the dinosaurs went extinct. And this is what's probably most astounding. 11:58:56 is when modern humans show up. So if Earth was a 24-hour period, humans have only been around for a minute and 4 seconds. That's crazy to think about. Um, to the hallway. Well, you don't have a hallway to go to if you're watching this at home, so we're going to skip that activity. So just how old are things? Well, I found this really nice video to tell it or that helped us figure out, how we know how old these things are. And so, it's going to start here. I don't know if you can hear this or not. But this is a really good video that goes through the process of radioactive dating and how we look at radioactive materials in order to figure out how old rocks are. Here's the YouTube link. I highly recommend that you go and you watch this video. I will provide this link also on our Angel page. But if you're not in my class and you're just watching this because you're so interested in learning science, go check out this video. It's really, really good. So here, half-life, this is the most important thing about radioactive dating. We know that things like carbon-14, it's a radioactive element, which means that it gives off radiation. Um, a rock that's formed has so much radioactive material in it. And if we look at how much of it is left, we can figure out how old it is. Now, may seem kind of confusing, but it has to deal with half-life. A half-life is how long it takes before half of the radioactive material has turned into something that's non-radioactive. And that's essentially what we mean by a half-life. So if I start out with 50 grams of radioactive material, its half-life would be the time that it takes for there to only be 25 grams of that radioactive material left. And each element or each radioactive material has a different half-life. I've got a Wikipedia if you just search half-lives in Wikipedia, it'll tell you some common half-lives. So if we look here, this is in general, we're starting out with the parent. That's the radioactive material. If we start out with 1 or 100%, after one half-life, we've only got half of that parent left. Half of it's been turned into this daughter, which is the non-radioactive material. After 2 half-lives, we only have a fourth of what we started with. 3 half-lives, an eighth. 4 half-lives, a 16th. And so on and so forth, and then 32nd. And so you can see how it's kind of bifurcating. And so we keep going, getting smaller and smaller and smaller amounts. Now this line approaches 0, and theoretically it should get to 0. But it's it takes a really long time for all of it to completely disappear. So if we look at how much of the parent or radioactive material we have versus how much of this daughter inert non-radioactive material, that tells us how many half-lives have passed. And so if the half-life is, let's say, 5 years, if we're sitting here with an eighth of our parent material and 7/8 daughter material, well, that's 3 half-lives. That means that this subject must be, 15 years old because 3 half-lives have passed. So radioactive decay tells us how old rocks are. Who cares? Well, that helps us figure out how old the evidence of living things are when we find them in the rock layer. This is a fossil, not of a dinosaur, but of a dinosaur footprint. So, obviously the dinosaur was alive to make this footprint, and relatively speaking, animals don't live that long. Things like humans live for, only 70 or 80 years. Turtles can live, a little over 100 years. So within, about 100 years, this organism died after making this footprint. So you can see the footprint right here. This is kind of a three-toed dinosaur going on here. If we know how old this rock is, we know about how old this organism was. And again, we use that radioactive decay to figure out how old the rock is, and then we know how old the subjects in the rock are. This is a fossil. Here, I took this picture on a geology trip. I took this one too, actually, out in Wyoming. Here, this quarter is just for scale, but you can see there's some fossilized clam shells in here. There's a whole bunch of them going on here. So these fossilized clams must be about the same age as the rock. Otherwise, why would they be fossilized in this rock? Well, the whole process of fossilization, again, I found another cool video. This one's kind of elementary, but I thought it was funny. We've got Dr. Dino. So yeah, you can listen to Dr. Dino, and he'll explain how fossilization works. Here's the link for that video on YouTube. And again, I'll provide a link for this on our Angel page. But this is also, I mean, it's kind of elementary, but it's kind of funny. I actually laughed a few times during it. It's an odd feeling to be, laughing and learning at the same time. But take a moment to watch that and take a few notes on it because it does a pretty good job of explaining how fossilization works. But here's the basics. An animal dies, gets buried by sediment. Remember, sediment is just things like dirt or sand. And so if it has to get buried by sediment to be fossilized, think about what areas that would have to happen in. If it's, desert and you've got blowing sand or dirt or whatever that might cover it up, or more likely it was, near water, like a river. If the animal died and sunk to the bottom and then was covered up by sediment, that sediment will eventually turn into sedimentary rock and preserve, um, the imprint or the fossilized remains of that animal that died. The fleshy stuff decomposes, so it rots, it disappears. Worms help with that process a lot. And then eventually the bone gets replaced by minerals. So when you're looking at a T-Rex bone, a fossilized bone, it's not actually bone anymore. It's just mineral. So any fossils that we have, they are not the original organism. They're mineralized remains. So the final fossil is basically, a rock. I use quotation marks because it's not actually a rock, but it's basically a rock. Fossils only occur in sedimentary rock. Why? Well, think about it. You guys know the three main types of rock. They are sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic. Igneous comes from cooled lava and volcanic activity. Think about it. If an animal falls in lava, is it going to be preserved? No, it's going to burn up. Metamorphic, under huge amounts of pressure and heat, again, it's going to destroy anything there. So it's only found in sedimentary rock. There's some kind of fossils that we call index fossils. Think about what an index is in your textbook. Okay, it helps you find things. An index fossil helps you find out how old either other fossils or layers of rock are. If we know how old an index fossil is, let's say that we know that it's 680,000 years old. If we find this fossil then in another rock layer, we can tell that that rock layer is probably about 680,000 years old. So it's used to compare the relative ages of rocks, relative meaning older or younger, not exact ages, in which they're found. It's most helpful if they only occur in a few rock layers. For example, if you find them in every single rock layer, it really doesn't help you figure out how old that rock layer is because you know, they all have it. If you find it next to another fossil, if you don't know about how old this index fossil is, because it's found in too many rock layers, then you don't know how old the other fossil is. And it's best when it occurs in many places. So for example, here's the Earth and this is going to be terrible. Here's North America and here's Africa. We know that these continents used to be closer together. So if we find a fossil here in, let's say, Louisiana and a fossil here in, say, the Horn of Africa, if it's the same fossil and the same or similar rock layer, that should tell us that these two must have been closer to each other at one point in time, which we know is indeed the case. North America and South America were nestled up here next to, Europe and Africa millions of years ago. One thing from geology that you need to know, this is a law. So again, this isn't a theory. This is just has to happen. This is fact. When we look at this word superposition, position means where you're at. Super means, referring to superior or above. If we look at this rock layer, this was taken outside of Hill City, South Dakota, actually like a mile away from the, what's it called? The Flintstones campground. So, they had, dino dinosaurs there, and down here, they have this outcropping of rock. This rock layer up here at the top, is younger than the rock layer down here at the bottom. Okay, that should be just a duh statement. Think about it. If you're going to build a cake, it's going to be a nice big layer cake. Can you put the top layer on before you do the bottom layer? No, can't happen, obviously. You can't put something on top of something that's not there. So in order for us to put down this layer of rock up here, these older layers all had to be there first. So the law of superposition says that as we go from bottom to top, our rocks are getting younger. There's a few other nuances to it, but that's what I want you to know is that as we go up, we're getting younger. As we go down, we're getting older. So let's say I find a fossilized bone in this rock layer, and we're going to call this rock layer A, and I find a fossilized bone in this layer, we call this rock layer B. Which one is older? Obviously A, because A, this organism, had to have lived at the time that this rock layer was being deposited. I mean, this is all sedimentary rock. B had to live at the time that this rock layer was being deposited. So if this rock layer had to be here before this one, that means that A must have lived before B. Okay, really, really helpful when we start looking at where fossils are found. And so again here, using relative dating, if we start looking, we find this guy, he occurs in a couple different layers. So when we start looking at this, we can tell, okay, there's obviously a river that ran through here and eroded this out. But we can start comparing the ages of these rocks from between different locations based on the fossils that are there. Again, here you see this fossil. He shows up here, and these guys are coming out of these pictures here. Um, but you don't see it over here. So that means that, if we were going to continue this, these rock layers would move over like this. So as we go from left to right in this picture, we're actually missing some rock layers because of things like erosion. And so by looking at the fossils that are present in these rock layers and seeing where they show up, again, see this one shows up both here and here, but not over here, that really helps us piece together what's going on, not only in biology and geology, or sorry, paleontology, but in the geology of land. So index fossils are very, very, very useful. Um, this is just kind of a fun question I'd like you to think about. Are there more species alive today, or were there more species alive in the past? And then if living things can be fossilized, why aren't there more fossils? Why is the fossil record incomplete? That's one big thing that people always argue against evolution is that, oh, well, our fossil record's incomplete, therefore evolution can't be true. But I want you to think about how fossils are made and then, the survival of fossils and think, is it really a surprise that our fossil record is incomplete? Because it's incomplete, is that good evidence to say that evolution isn't happening? Just some things to think about as we continue on with our discussion of evolution.